There is something fascinating about people who grew up in the 1970s, and psychology can prove it. If you grew up in this era, your brain developed during a rare evolutionary window, a time of total freedom combined with genuine responsibility. And here is what is interesting. Most people who grew up in the 70s look at our current generation and just laugh. Not in a mean way, but because they know something the rest of us don't. They experienced something that can never be recreated. A time so free, so genuinely magical, that decades later they still say things like, "I wish I could go back and stay there. We really didn't know how good we had it." Or perhaps the most honest version, "We grew up on hose water. We were feral, and it was glorious." So what made the 70s so special? And more importantly, what did it do to your brain that makes you genuinely different today? The first trait is what researchers call self-directed problem solving. And it started with one phrase every single 70s kid remembers. Go find something to do, or I'll find something for you to do. You knew exactly what that meant. If you dared say you were bored, suddenly you were folding clothes or sweeping floors. So you learned fast. Figure it out yourself. Here's what was actually happening in your brain during those moments. When a child has no external stimulus, no screen, no scheduled activity, no adult directing them, the brain doesn't go idle. It activates. Specifically, it activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network, the system responsible for imagination, planning, and self-generated narrative. The system, quite literally, that produces original thought. You weren't handed activities. You weren't scheduled. You had to invent your entire day from nothing. This is why you devoured books, why you explored on your bike for hours, why you spent entire afternoons building things in the woods that no adult ever asked you to build. Your brain learned something that modern childhood skips almost entirely: how to generate purpose from emptiness. And that skill, that deeply internal drive, is with you still. That explains your creativity, but it doesn't explain why you seem almost supernaturally calm in chaos. That comes from something different, something researchers call adaptive risk calibration. You grew up climbing trees that were definitely too high, riding bikes without helmets, throwing rocks at each other, setting things on fire with fireworks on the 4th of July. You could say that was our internet. Every scraped knee was a lesson in pain tolerance. Every close call was a lesson in probability. Every minor disaster was a lesson in consequence. But here's the neurological depth of what was actually happening. When children experience physical risk without adult intervention, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that regulates your stress response, learns to calibrate. It learns the difference between a signal that means danger and a signal that means challenge. You broke bones, you got scars, and they honestly felt like medals of honor with stories behind them. This is why you can walk into a genuine crisis and just start solving it, while everyone around you is still deciding to panic. Your nervous system has been here before. Maybe not in this form, but in every tree that was too high, it learned that discomfort is not the same as danger. But here's where it gets deeper, and this is the piece that most people today will never fully understand. You carry what researchers call comfortable solitude capacity. You spent hours in your room just listening to music. You laid on grass, talking to friends, watching clouds. You explored alone, not because you were lonely, but because there was no screen demanding your attention every 3 seconds. Studies on pre-digital childhood consistently find that people who grew up before constant connectivity show significantly less anxiety when left alone with their own thoughts. In fact, a striking piece of research from the University of Virginia asked participants to sit quietly in a room for 15 minutes. The alternative offered to them? A mild electric shock. A significant number of people chose the shock. You would probably find that hard to believe, because you learned early, in the most formative years of your brain's development, that boredom is not an emergency, that silence is not a void to be filled. It is a space where something important can grow. Your brain never developed the addiction to constant stimulation that quietly defines modern life. This is why you can wait in a long line without losing your composure, why silence at a dinner table doesn't make you uncomfortable, why you don't need background noise to think. That capacity is rarer than you realize and more valuable than it appears. The fourth trait is what psychologists call analog patience, and it shaped you in ways you probably don't even consciously register. You waited for your favorite show once a week. No binge watching, no streaming. One episode, 1 week. You waited. You took photos on a roll of film and waited days, sometimes weeks, to find out if they turned out. If you wanted to talk to someone, you memorized their phone number. You dialed. You hoped they were home. This wasn't an inconvenience. This was the entire structure of your emotional life. Every desired thing required waiting, and that waiting was not empty time. It was a rehearsal for the brain's most sophisticated regulatory skill, the ability to tolerate the gap between wanting and having. This is why instant gratification doesn't satisfy you the way it does for younger generations. You know at a cellular level that the thing you have to wait for tastes different than the thing that arrives immediately. You know that patience is not passive. It is a form of strength. And here's the trait that ties everything together. You have what I call unsupervised autonomy wiring. At 8 years old, you left the house in the morning, and your parents had one rule: be back before the streetlights come on. Nobody knew where you were. Nobody tracked your location. Nobody texted to check in. You rode your bike to creeks a mile from home. You wandered into neighborhoods you'd never been to. You played in the woods until dark. And yes, sometimes a stranger offered you lemonade after a long afternoon by the creek, and you took it, and nothing happened. Because the world was not safer then, but your judgment was real. Research on childhood independence shows something profound. Children who had genuine freedom of movement without constant surveillance developed measurably stronger internal motivation, better decision-making, and more accurate self-assessment. Your parents weren't your friends, they were the authority, and they trusted you to be competent. That trust, perhaps more than anything else, told your developing brain something that no curriculum can teach. You are capable. The world will not collapse. Figure it out. This is why decades later you can plan, adapt, and think critically without waiting for someone to tell you what to do next. Every time you look at today's world and feel slightly out of place, remember this: you are not outdated. You are carrying forward capabilities that are going extinct. The independence that looks like coldness, that is competence. The comfort with silence that looks like antisocial behavior, that is depth. The ability to wait that looks like apathy, that is discipline. The willingness to act alone that looks like stubbornness, that is self-trust. The calm in chaos that others call detachment, that is a nervous system that learned the difference between real danger and manageable discomfort. You survived a childhood that would get parents arrested today, and it didn't damage you, it built you. For a brief moment in human history, childhood was both completely free and genuinely formative. You got to experience something that doesn't exist anymore, a world where children were civilized and feral at the same time. Most people who grew up in the 70s say the same thing. I feel honored to have grown up this way.
We lived through the best decade to be a kid. And they're right. What was built inside you, quietly, without anyone naming it, was something that cannot be downloaded, cannot be learned in a course, cannot be scheduled into a childhood. It was built in time that felt like nothing, that turned out to be everything.